Colin Cadet for Woodwork Web. Today I want to talk briefly about table saw safety, and in particular I want to talk about push sticks for table saws. Now, table saw safety is not complicated. You just need to make sure that you're keeping your fingers out of the blade. And we do that by a few things. The first thing is using a push stick. Now, if you have one of these, this is called a chicken foot. If you have one of these and you're using it on your table saw, throw it out. I only keep this around to show what not to use on a table saw, and I'll show you why in a moment. What I do is quite simply, with scraps of plywood, I make little push sticks. I like to use plywood because it's a little bit more rigid, and it's inexpensive. It costs nothing, a little bit of work on a bandsaw or a jigsaw, and I make them in different widths as well. This is some scrap 1/8 inch for doing really thin cuts on the table saw. These are a little bit thicker. When I'm doing a lot of wood, I like to have a little bit thicker grip. So you can make your own push sticks. That's easy. Now let's see why it's important not to use a chicken foot push stick. You don't have to go to a lot of work making a push stick that works very well. You can use a scrap piece of wood, just a plain old piece of wood. I actually like to use 2x6s because they work well, but this is just a 3/4 inch piece of scrap pine. And in your workshop you probably have some kind of a container that you keep scraps of wood that you use for stirring paint and glue and things like that. And in there's probably something that's 3/4 inch wide. All you need to do is cut a little piece and just glue it on the end so that you get a little foot on there, and then when that's glued, that then becomes your push stick. In fact, you could glue one on each side so you could use it that way, because these will eventually get eaten up by the saw blade and you'll have to redo it. But a push stick like this will last you years. All you have to do is glue a little piece on the end of it. So the first thing I want to show you is why we never use a chicken's foot push stick on a table saw. Now, I've removed all of the guides and I've actually raised the table saw blade up so that you can see what I'm talking about. Here's the chicken foot push stick. Now, what happens when you're pushing wood through is the blade rotates in this manner. It goes from the back of the saw to the front of the saw. You can see there, you can see that better. So it rotates in that manner. Now, when you're pushing the wood through at the beginning, that blade is pushing down on the wood. But as you continue to move that wood through the saw, what happens now is the wood at the back of the blade, if the fence is a little bit pinched at the back, or if there's something, a piece of wood or something can cause that, because that wood at the back, or that blade is going up like that, it has a tendency to start lifting that wood. And when you have a chicken's foot push stick down here and you get near the end of the board and all of a sudden it starts to pinch, now you're in a real danger area, because that wood can actually flip up as you go through the wood. That blade, there's a lot of power in here, that blade can actually flip that wood up. Now, this is a little bit longer piece, a little bit, if you were using a little bit shorter piece, it would be even more critical. I just moved the space here so you could run that wood through. So that's why we never use a chicken's foot. If you have one of these, use it on your bandsaw or throw it away. The reason I like this kind of push stick so much is that down here there's a little notch that catches the wood, so as you're pushing it through, but here you're holding it, and what happens in here is this area you can actually push down on the wood, so you can support the wood as you're pushing it through, so you actually have far better control of that wood that you're pushing through. Let's go back to the table saw and see the difference. So back at the table saw again, the blade rotates in that direction, and now you can see that if you have a push stick that actually supports that wood, you can actually control it. So even if that wood does have a tendency to flip up there, now you can push it down. That's why this kind of a push stick, and there's all my different versions of it, that's why this kind of a push stick, which costs nothing except a little bit of your time, is far safer to use on the table saw. The other main safety feature with using a table saw is to make sure that your table saw blade is no more than 1/4 or 1/2 tooth above the material that you're cutting. That in itself will reduce a lot of possibilities of you getting injured. So let's go again back to the table saw and have a look at that. Oh, and by the way, most table saw blades are designed so that they actually cut better if the tooth is only 1/4 to 1/2 tooth above the material. So let's go back and readjust the table saw to where it should be. Here we are back at the saw. And if we were really going to cut this piece of wood, we would want this saw blade drop down to just right about there. You can see that's just barely above the wood that we're going to cut. And that blade has been designed to give an optimal cut when that tooth is just 1/4 or 1/2 above the material. So you can actually see how much safer that would be if you were, when you're pushing wood through, to not have the blade 3 inches above the material. And so that's table saw safety. It's important that we understand and practice table saw safety so that we can continue to do these wonderful woodworking projects that we work on. It's important to make sure that you use the guards and the splitters and the anti-kickbacks that these tools all that people develop into all of these tools. Make sure that you read your manual so that you understand how these things work and how they all work together. I'm Colin Cadet for Woodwork Web. Please check out our website for more tips and information, and have a look at our forums. Maybe there's somebody there that you can help with some questions that they might have on woodworking.